intentional about practicing, because we have all these kind of forces, both within and without, that are encouraging us to be silent. But we can't be silent because we've got great news to share. So that's what today's about, is helping you to get more comfortable sharing the great news that God has done in your life, which Cody's been doing for years and years and years. I came here 14 years ago, and he was a high school kid, sharing about Jesus, and has continued ever since then, including 2 years with Net Ministries, National Evangelization Teams, so driving around the country in a bus for weeks and weeks on end, going to high schools and junior highs and sharing the good news of Jesus with them. So, and he's currently a teacher at Father Gabriel Richard in the math department, and is, I learned, it sounds like moving on from there. So pray for him and what God has in store for him. And thanks for coming. We'll have a handout that will get you when you need it.
All right. As Dominic said, my name is Cody Bouse. I was a parishioner here for most of my life. About 3 years ago, the Lord called me to move. I live out in South Lyon now, and so unfortunately I'm not here on a weekly basis anymore, but it is a pleasure to be back. Is this coming in and out?
Yeah, if you step back a little bit, you'll
Step back. Back here.
No, just a little bit. Oh.
Talk here. I have to stay here for the entire time. That is going to be a problem, but okay. All right, so we're here to talk about testimonies, okay? And like any self-respecting high school teacher, the first thing that I did is I Googled what is a testimony, okay? Thanks. This is what Google has to say. It gave a bunch of definitions. These were the first two that popped up before you had to scroll down and look at more. Formal or written or spoken statement, especially given in court of law, evidence or proof provided by the existence or appearance of something. That's what Google has to say about it. And if you click the little arrow and you scroll down, eventually you'll get to the one that we probably were thinking of when we came in, of it's some sort of statement of a religious experience. Okay? Can we go back to that one real quick? Thanks. Now when we're looking at this, right, we are making a statement. We are providing proof or evidence of something. Right, that is our goal here. We're providing proof or evidence of God working in our life. That is one of the primary points of giving a testimony, is we want to witness to others that this is what God has done for me. So the definition I'm going to take is this one that we're going to use for the talk. So a testimony is just a story of how you encountered God. Okay? We're telling a story about this encounter between you and God. That's all we're trying to do. It doesn't have to be fancy, you don't have to have a PhD, you don't have to have any of this, you just have to be able to tell a story. And as human beings, we are wired for stories. Okay, we tell stories all the time, from how our day went to this is the hilarious thing that my child did, to anything else besides, right? We tell stories. Okay? So we're just going to tell this story, right? And it's got two characters in it, right? It has you. I think we're a couple slides behind, actually. I get the highlight on the you. So it is you, right? And you are part of this. Okay, lesson number 1 on how to give a bad testimony. If you get up and you give a testimony, and then I could come up after you and say the exact same thing word for word, and it would still be a true statement, it's a bad testimony. Right? This is you. You are a unique individual who has been created by God, different from everybody else. And because of that, God has worked in your life in a unique way that is different from the way he has worked in anyone else's life. And therefore, your testimony is unique. It is different. It is not going to be the same as my testimony or Dominic's testimony or anybody else's testimony. Right? So you are part of this. Testimonies are personal by nature. Okay? The other character here is God. Okay? So you encountered God. Now God, as a reminder, because sometimes we talk about God and we forget how awesome he is, right? We are talking about the creator of the universe. We are talking about the God who loved us all into existence. We are talking about the Father who loved us so much that he sent his Son. We are talking about the Son who was obedient unto the point of death for our sins. We are talking about the Son who rose again. We're talking about the Holy Spirit who descended at Pentecost, this great feast that we celebrate today, and gave birth to this church that is still around 2,000 years later, and who is still moving and working in all of our lives. And this God, who is infinite, who is all-powerful, who is all-knowing, has seen fit to meet us, to encounter us in a personal, unique way. And this is the key crux of the matter, right? If there wasn't this encounter, we would not have a testimony to give. Right? All of us have a story, and the grand assumption I'm going to make is that we have at least once in our lives, we have encountered God. Maybe more than once, hopefully more than once, but at least once, we have encountered God. This infinite God has seen fit to meet us in a personal way. We have met him, and whenever we meet God in all of his majesty, in all of his glory, we are changed. Something happens, and we are changed forever. Or at least we should be. And we're changed for the better, right? Because God is not just infinite, he's not just powerful, he's also good. And he loves us so dearly, so intimately, that we have this encounter moment, and we walk away changed for the better. Right? We now have this new dimension of understanding of our life, of God's existence, of his presence in our life, and that is worth talking about. Right? That should be the most joyful, exciting thing that just sends us out into the streets, and we need to talk to anybody at all that we can possibly get a hold of. Okay? Let me give you a really lame example. Right? Years ago, I was at a Michigan football game. Okay? We were playing Michigan State. It's a rivalry game. It's a big deal. I was a student at the time, so I'm sitting in the student section, surrounded by however many thousands of other students, all clad in maize and blue. And it goes from at the beginning of the game, this rah, we're playing Michigan State and whatnot, and then it's a defensive battle, points are at a premium. The second half was a nail biter all the way, and it comes down to the very end on the final play. Michigan's kicking a field goal. They're down by 2. They make it, they win. They miss it, they lose. You could have heard a pin drop in a stadium of like 100,000 plus people. And the Michigan kicker goes and he kicks it and he makes it, and we win the game. It was the 1,000th win. The stadium explodes. Everyone's excited. I get hugged by like 12 people I've never met before. Okay? Everyone is so overjoyed. And we're around and we're dancing and yelling and screaming for 10 minutes after the fact. And finally we calm down enough to actually exit the stadium in nothing near a nice, neat, orderly manner. And as we're walking out, as I'm going through the gate, I'm with a couple buddies of mine, and we're walking behind 2 gentlemen. And one of these guys is talking to the other, and he's giving this other guy the play-by-play of the game-winning drive that we just watched 10 minutes ago. Right? He's telling his buddy, who it seems like they came together, and they probably sat together, and they watched the same football game together, but guy number 1 is giving his buddy the play-by-play of the game-winning drive that we just watched. Right? Because this gentleman, whoever he was so excited, he was so enthused, he was so joyful that Michigan had just beaten Michigan State. He had to tell somebody about it. He had to talk about it. He had to get it out there. And even though there was somebody who had already seen all of this, who already knew the play-by-play, he still just was so overflowing with joy, he needed to say something. Michigan football is great. I'm a Michigan fan. I have been all my life. They beat Michigan State, and they won a national championship this year. It's great. It's good. But God is infinitely better than Michigan football. And an encounter with God should be an infinitely more joyful experience than Michigan winning a football game. And therefore, talking about an encounter with God should be infinitely more important and infinitely easier than talking about Michigan winning a football game. Right? When we encounter God, there should be this overflow of joy in us that we just need to run out and we need to tell people about it. And unfortunately, we live in a culture that says, no. Keep that all quiet and hidden and don't talk about it, right? It's the culture of silence that Dominic was talking about just a moment ago. And And we need to break from that cycle, right? In a world that tries to normalize every single thing, let's normalize something that's actually worth normalizing, right? Talking about our encounter moments with God. So we're going to take that joy, we're going to go forth, right? And the other reason behind this is the people who we're going to talk to, they need it, right? This is a world that desperately needs hope. This is a world that desperately needs to hear that God is alive and working, right? Over the last 50 years, we have seen in our country the rates for depression, self-harm, suicide, and a bunch of other things on that topic have all risen dramatically over the last 50 years. We live in a culture that is becoming increasingly devoid of hope. A culture that is depressed. People need to hear that there is a God, and He is working, and He loves us, and He is still coming for us, trying to bring us back to Him, inviting us into a relationship with Him. The gospel message, far from being dead, as a lot of the church's critics would say it is, the gospel message is more relevant than it ever has been before. And we need to bring this personal witness out to people because they really need to hear it. All right, Jesus gives us this command. This was just the gospel last Sunday when we celebrated the Ascension, right? Jesus said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." Right? This is the great commandment. This is the sending forth of His disciples. This is something that we ourselves share in this call. Here we are 2,000 years later, as baptized members of the church, as confirmed Catholic. We are called to do the same. To go forth and to preach and to witness to the ends of the earth. Okay? And it starts with do it with the people who are right in front of you. Right? St. Mother Teresa used to tell people when they would come and they'd say, "Hey, I want to go with you, and I want to be a missionary of charity, and I want to go and minister to people in India or whatever other corner of the world." And she used to tell people, "Go home and evangelize your family first. Then you can come and do it with me." So we're going to all of creation, and it starts with the people closest to us, right? When we're talking about who we evangelize to, who we testify to, oftentimes it conjures this picture in our mind of like, I'm going to go find a random person on the street, okay? And that's true, and we'll get to that, and we definitely should do that when the opportunity presents itself, but it starts here, right? We as a parish community, first and foremost, should be testifying to each other, right? How awesome would our parish community be, or how much would it grow if we could normalize at coffee and donuts that we go and be like, "Hey Jim, what's the Lord doing in your life this past week? You know, what is God working on in you right now? How have you encountered Him?" Whatever the question might be, right? And then Jim would ask me the same question in return, right? And that's important for us to do because, number one, right, we are here gathered together as a community of believers. We should talk about God. We should talk about what God is doing in our lives. So that way we can be a little more than just, hey, the Catholics who happen to be in the Saline and the surrounding area. But we are an actual community that is united together by glorifying God. Secondly, it's a charitable thing to do, right? If I'm asking Jim, what's God doing in your life, then, hey, I'm being there for him, okay? I want to hear about what's happening in Jim's life. I want to hear what's going on with him. I want to hear how God is working with him. Okay? I'm trying to know Him and love Him in a communal way. Another thing that's awesome about it is it's really good practice. Right? Sometimes when we're trying to go out and we're trying to give our testimony to people who aren't Catholic, who aren't part of the St. Andrew Parish community, right, that can be hard. That can be difficult because you get a whole range of responses. Sometimes they're really excited, sometimes they're curious, sometimes they're openly hostile, okay? If Jim's telling me about his latest encounter with God, I'm not gonna be hostile. I'm not gonna flip tables, I'm not gonna call him names or anything like that, right? I'm a pretty safe audience. And you know, when you're doing a testimony, right, like anything else, practice makes perfect, right? So start here. Start with, you are going to be talking with other people, other members of this parish community about what God is doing in your life. Get used to that language. Get used to that style of being able to talk about God working. After we do that, let's go back. I wasn't done with that one yet. Sorry, thanks. All right, so after we do that, then we're looking outwards, right? To anybody else, okay? And we're looking for both random stranger we pass at the supermarket, as well as coworkers, family, friends, anything else besides. Okay, now I'll take the next slide. Right? So when do we do this though? Okay? Well, here's the Bible verse. That's the official verse for this workshop, right? 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope, but do it with gentleness and reverence. Okay? And I want to note that St. Peter, inspired by the Holy Spirit as he was writing this letter, did not say, you must give your personal testimony in every conversation you have for the rest of your life. He did not say, the 11th commandment is, thou shalt testify in every single moment. Okay? Now there certainly is, we live every moment of our life to glorify God, and that is true. That does not mean that we're spending every moment giving our personal testimony, our encounter story with God. Right? What St. Peter says is always be ready. Be ready for when the opportunity presents itself. Okay? Because those opportunities are going to come. Okay? Sometimes people might just ask, right? If you were living out a Catholic life at some point, someone's going to say, why are you Catholic? It's going to happen. Okay? And that could get curious, it could be hostile, it could be anything else in between, but at some point, people are going to ask. But there's also a broad range of opportunities besides, right, your profession. Every profession out there, graced by God, has elements that connect it to the Lord, right? The truth of it, the goodness of it, the beauty of it, right? Every profession, every good profession at least, is going to connect with that in some way, and that's going to be an opportunity, right? I'm a teacher, so I have, there's a quote from Pope Paul VI, right? Mankind in today's modern man listens more readily to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it's because they are witnesses. I have sat with that quote, I have prayed with that quote, I have it mostly memorized, as you just saw. I'm ready with that. And there are times where it comes up that I'm talking to other teachers that I just drop that quote in. And then we discuss it and we talk about it. And maybe it leads to me giving a testimony of personal experience of things I have seen in the classroom where this has happened. Maybe it leads to just a conversation about Catholicism in general. Okay, maybe it just leads to talking about how cool Pope Paul VI was, because he was a pretty cool pope, right? Whatever the case was, right? There's something that's there which I'm able to drop in. There's also times where if you are just doing the Catholic thing, right? If you are making this lifelong journey to try to bring every aspect of your life into conformity with God, those opportunities are going to arise. One of the greatest affirmations that I ever received was back when I was in high school, and one of my classmates asked me, Cody, you always seem so much happier than everybody else. What's your secret? It was like, great, well, let me tell you about this Jesus guy. Okay? Right? When you are going to be in your profession and you are going to treat everyone with respect, that at some point is going to beg a question about where does that come from. When you choose to be honest in your dealings with other people, okay, even if it's hard, right, that's going to beg a question at some point. If you are living out a Catholic life, these opportunities are going to come along, either because people are asking you in some way, or because you're able to just have something that you have thought about, that you've dwelled upon, that you can just bring up in conversation naturally. Okay? And the key word here is naturally. This is what we're looking for. We are always ready, and we're looking for these natural opportunities that are going to occur, that the Holy Spirit is going to provide to us. Okay? Always being ready does not look like I've got to be sitting here thinking in a conversation, okay, is that sentence they just said an opportunity for me to give my testimony? Maybe not. So let me say this, because maybe that's going to lead us a little closer to it. And then they said this in response, and yes, there we go. That's within like 3 degrees of separation of Jesus Christ, so I'm going for it. Here's my testimony. That's just going to make you a weird conversationalist, okay? Let it come for you. Look for the opportunities. One of the things that I have learned as a teacher is that if I bring my students in and I force them to sit there and I force them to pay attention while I talk at them, and they're just forced to do it, they are going to resent me and they're going to resent the subject I'm talking about. Okay? I think that's true with math and Jesus both. Math maybe is a little more of a disadvantage, I don't know. But, right, the goal of this is not to become the person who forces the Catholic stuff down anybody's throat every opportunity they get. The goal of this is that we are always ready. We are always on the watch. And when that moment comes that someone says, why are you Catholic? We are ready with an answer. Okay? When somebody says, or somebody asks you, why are you Catholic? That is the worst time to think about why you're Catholic. Okay? We need to be ready in advance. And so what I'm going to encourage you guys is to have at least 2 things ready on the testimony front. The first of which is you have a 1, maybe 2 sentence answer to that question, why are you Catholic? A literal elevator speech. You know, you get in the elevator, you hit the number 7 button to go up to your floor, and on your way up, the guy standing next to you is like, so here you're Catholic, what's that all about? Okay, and in the 15 seconds you have before the elevator dings and the door opens, you can respond and say, this is why I'm Catholic, 1 or 2 sentences. Done. Okay. If somebody were to ask me, why am I Catholic? Then I would respond with, well, when I was 14 years old, I went on a retreat and I met Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Okay. And I've said that to a number of people at different times in my life, and I have gotten to get the whole gambit of answers. Some people have been really curious. Some people have been like, what's a Eucharist? Some people have been openly hostile and, open the door now, he's crazy, open door, something like that, right? You get the whole gambit, right? But there's the 1 or 2 sentence, this is why I am Catholic, okay? And again, that's personal, okay? So being able to say something like, well, the Catholic Church is right. That's a good answer, it's technically correct, but it's not, it lacks the personal touch, right? Why are you, specifically you, Catholic? Why do you, specifically you, believe in Jesus? And then, if they were to come and they were to say, well, okay, here, walk with me to my desk. Tell me more about that. What do you mean, you're 14 and you encountered Jesus in the Eucharist, like, what's that all about? Well, that's time for opportunity number 2. Okay, and the second thing that I'm going to ask you guys to do is to have a default testimony. Okay, there's any number of testimonies because we can encounter God any number of times, and because God is infinite, each and every one of those times can bring new graces and new lessons and new healing to us. But we should have in our back pocket at least 1 testimony that we are ready with, that we have practiced, that we can give, and that we are able to give to anybody. Okay, right? And when I say give to anybody, I mean it doesn't have anything that's like super personal, super confidential that you might be willing to share with like a close friend, but not with a stranger on the street. Whatever this default testimony is, be ready to share it with a stranger on the street, a coworker you meet, family friend, random person at Coffee and Donuts, whatever the case may be. Okay? So if I'm walking there with my imaginary coworker and they're going to say, hey, tell me what's going on with this. What do you mean you were 14, you encountered Jesus, the Eucharist? Well, I would say something like this. Okay, so I was 14, I was technically a sophomore in high school, and I am, on this Catholic retreat. And I don't know actually how I ended up on that Catholic retreat, but I did. It was a weekend retreat through my high school youth group. We're out in this camp, and I was a normal 14-year-old boy struggling with normal 14-year-old boy problems, right? I had just moved to a new school. I didn't have a lot of friends. The people at this youth group, I didn't know them as well because we didn't go to the same school. I didn't really feel like I felt like I fit in. I felt kind of distant from anybody. And so I was just a little lost, but I was still going with this retreat and hanging out in the back and just checking it out. And on this retreat, the leaders, the youth volunteers, kept telling me how much Jesus loved me. Okay? And I did not believe them. Right? I believed that God existed. I had been raised Catholic, and so that was just kind of always part of the thing, right? The sky is blue, the grass is green, there is a God. that was just like normal stuff. But I had never encountered him before. I had never had any personal connection with him before. I did not believe that he loved me. That just seemed weird and wrong. But over those few days, the leaders kept telling me this over and over and over again. It was tied to the theme of the retreat. And I still don't believe them. But we came to this time on the second night of the retreat where we were going to have Eucharistic adoration. And the Eucharist, we as Catholics believe that in Mass, when bread and wine are brought forward to the altar, the bread and the wine, when the priest prays the appropriate prayers over it, they actually become Jesus Christ. And Eucharistic adoration is where one of the hosts, a piece of unleavened bread that is now Jesus Christ, it is saved after Mass. And in adoration, we put Jesus, the Eucharistic host, in this shiny gold thing that holds him up so that everyone can see. And we pray before Jesus Christ, who is truly present there with us. And on that retreat, as the priest is going to bring Jesus in, I made the first honest prayer that I ever had in all my life. And I said something like this: God, if you're out there, if you're listening, if you actually love me as much as these leaders seem to think that you do, show me. And that was my prayer. And I challenged God, and he showed up. And when the priest brought in Jesus, and he placed him before all of us, and we were praying before him, it was an experience that words can't do justice. But as near as I can get, I felt this tremendous presence in the room. Like the whole entire space had just been filled with this overwhelming presence. And I felt like I was being wrapped in this huge hug, and I felt so loved and so safe and so comforted. And we prayed there for 2 hours. I felt that the entire time. And then the priest came in and he took Jesus back out of the room, and the presence left. And before I got up off of my knees, I said to myself, that's really God, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life chasing him. And that's what I've tried to do for the last 15 years of my life, is I have tried to chase God. And I have made mistakes, and I have stumbled and whatnot, but at the end of the day, I have never truly, since that day, felt alone. I've never truly, since that day, felt distant, because I know that God is there for me. I know he loves me. I know he's with me. And I'd invite you to come check it out, because he loves you too. Right? End of testimony. That's what we're looking for with the default testimony, right? I could give that testimony. I just gave it to you guys, and I don't know half the people in this room, right? I could give it to a random stranger I met on the street. I have actually, from my time on mission work particularly, given that to other rooms full of people I don't know. I have given it to a random person I was standing in the grocery store line with. I have given it to a bunch of people, right? This is the default testimony. You pull it out, it's ready for any situation whatsoever. You've practiced it, you're ready with it, you are good to go. Okay? Let's go ahead to the next one. All right, so let's talk the practicals. How do we write a default testimony? Okay, well again, this is a story of how you encountered God. This is the thesis statement, this is the outline. Next slide, please. All right, so every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You encountered God. That is your outline here. Okay, the beginning of the story is, one more slide, please. Right, so this is you before the encounter. Okay. Introduce yourself if it's needed, okay? If it's a random stranger on the street, then yes, totally, introduce yourself, do the whole 9 yards. If it is a coworker and you need to give a little background information they don't know about you, give the background information. If it's somebody you know really well, then skip this step entirely, okay? But do whatever introduction of yourself you need to do. Once you've done that, okay, the big thing here is you want to pull out what are the 1 or 2 things that were missing in your life. Because each and every one of us, we had something that was missing, and then when we encountered God, we had it, okay? None of us are perfect, before the encounter or after the encounter, but there is some greater perfection, some step in that direction that occurred when we encountered God. So pull it out. We're setting the stage for the encounter and for the way that God moved in our life, okay? With me, with the testimony I just gave, I told you I felt distance from other people, okay? I felt alone. That was That was the thing that was missing in my life. And you'll notice that wasn't like some terrible, horrible sin that I was, committing. Not all of us have, St. Paul, conversion moments where we go from, being murderers to being evangelists for the gospel, okay? You don't have to, right? Maybe your thing is there was some sin you were committing, great or small. Maybe it's just something was missing, something was incomplete. Whatever the case is, set the stage for God to come in and be the hero, okay? And number 3 here, right? Be honest, okay? I've seen a lot of people who give their testimony and they want to go in one way or the other from what actually happened. Some people, right, they try to downplay whatever they were missing. Well, that doesn't help anybody, right? Because now you're trying to make it look like you're perfect, right? God doesn't have the stage set for him to come in and be the hero that he was. You have to have just a little bit of vulnerability here in your brokenness. Okay? Don't go the other way either, right? Don't exaggerate the brokenness, okay? This is not some sob story of I was alone and unloved and nobody liked me whatsoever and I was poor little orphan Annie. No, that's not what happened, okay? If you exaggerate it and you make it way too much, then people already are thinking they don't believe you, and by the time you get to encountering God, then they're definitely not believing you. You've done nobody any favors, okay? So set the stage, be honest, pull out 1 or 2 things that you're missing, right? All right, then you have the middle, okay? This is the encounter with God. So you're going to describe this encounter, and you're going to do the best that you can to communicate this in a way that other people who aren't familiar with Catholicism can understand, right? I gave an explanation of what the Eucharist was and what Eucharistic adoration was in my testimony, okay? Of you in this room, probably most, if not all of you, know what the Eucharist is, I hope at least. You probably know what Eucharistic adoration is, okay? But in my default testimony that I'm prepared to give to anybody, I'm going to take that moment and explain that. And if I was sitting with somebody and I know that they know what the Eucharist is, I'm going to skip those 15 seconds of my testimony and just move on. Okay? You'll also notice that I did not give a PhD dissertation on what the Eucharist is. Many people have done that before. I'm not qualified to do it, and it also wouldn't be the point of a testimony, and you're going to lose people. Okay? Give enough so that they know what's going on. Don't overburden them. Okay? So you're going to talk through what the encounter was. Okay? And then, really important, you're going to tie it to the thing you were missing. Right? When I gave my testimony, what was the thing I was missing? I felt distant. I felt a little bit alone. I tied in, I felt like Jesus hugged me, like he was there for me. I felt so comforted by that, right? So I have, what's the thing that's missing? What's the way that Jesus is supplying that thing that is missing? Okay? Again, be honest, right? Be honest with this one. We don't need to exaggerate it. We don't need to undersell it. This is the way that God has chosen to meet you. And God is smarter and wiser than you are. So let him be the author of the story. You're just retelling it. Okay? The other thing I want to point out, there's a Bible verse that is being cut off here. But this comes from 1 Kings. It's part of a longer passage. And Elisha goes up on a mountain. He's in a cave. And the Lord says to the prophet, Elisha, go out. I'm about to come past. Okay? And so Elisha goes out to the entrance of his cave. And there's a great rushing wind that comes by, and the Lord's not in the wind. And there's an earthquake, and the Lord's not in the earthquake. And there's a huge fire, and the Lord's not in the fire. And then there's this very tiny whisper, and the Lord is in the whisper. Okay? Some of us have, call them lightning bolt conversion moments. Okay? Great. Own that. If that is your testimony, if that is your encounter, go for it. Okay, the world needs to hear about how the Lord moves in power. If you have a quiet testimony, a very, very small, quiet encounter, tell about a quiet encounter. Because sometimes, oftentimes, that is how the Lord chooses to work. So, tell the quiet story, if that's what's needed, because different people need to hear different stories. They need to hear of different ways that the Lord has moved and worked. Okay. The end, right? You're going to tie it all together. This is how God is in your life. So you're going to talk about how has your life changed for the better. Okay? Note the for the better part. If it's not for the better, then this is not a testimony we need to share with somebody trying to convince them to come into the Catholic Church, right? But how has your life changed? It should have changed in some way. You encountered the infinite God. He did something. He worked in you in some way, shape, or form. You are changed. There is some healing that you have received, some grace that you have gotten, some important, vital lesson that He has taught you, or something else besides. Talk about it. Tie it into the thing that you were missing. I also think you should close every testimony with an invitation. Something that fits with the rest of your testimony, right? I close with, hey, you should come with me sometime. Let's go to church together. Come see the community for yourself. Come see God for yourself. Right? Because you never know who you're talking to that is experiencing the exact same struggle that you were struggling with. Right? I have talked to people who give this testimony to people where they are also struggling with feeling alone. They're struggling with feeling distant from people. They feel like they don't fit in. And when I say, cool, so that's my story, do you want to come fit in with me somewhere? They're like, yes. Doesn't happen every time. I wish it happened more. But it happens. So give them an invitation. Okay? There's a quote from Zacchaeus, or not Zacchaeus, from the Gospel of Luke about Zacchaeus here, right? Jesus invites Zacchaeus. Really, he invited himself to Zacchaeus' home. Not really within social norms, but he's Jesus, he's God, he's allowed to do it. Right, and Zacchaeus is just overjoyed to receive someone because he's got someone with him. Do the same, right? Invite them. So this isn't just like, I've closed up a story, it's cool, okay, good luck, have a good life and whatnot. Invite them. So that way, if they want, you can't force them to take it, but if they want, the door is open that this can proceed further. Okay? All right, a few things that we want to make certain that we are avoiding. Okay? First of all, be yourself. Again, this is personal. Okay? Testimonies are inherently personal. And so you need to be yourself both in the story that you tell, but also in the way that you tell it. Okay, I'll give you two examples. A few years ago, I met a woman who, she and I worked together on a project, and she would gush about Jesus. And if you asked her what Jesus was doing in her life, then you better sit down because you were going to be here for half an hour minimum. And she is going to tell you this emotional roller coaster of a story that is going to be beautiful in every step of the way about how Jesus has worked in her life. Laughs will be had, tears will be shed. It's going to be great. Okay? That was her personality. That was who she was, and that was how she could tell a testimony. I knew another guy a few years before that. I met him during my Annette days. And he was a very quiet, very reserved guy, didn't really show a lot of emotion. That was just his personality. And you could sit with him and you could talk about Jesus for hours. And he would tell you about the wonderful things that God had done in his life for hours. But it wasn't an emotional roller coaster. There were no tears being shed. But he would talk very quietly, with passion and conviction, consistently, for hours at a time about the love of God that he had experienced. That was him. That was who he was. That was the unique child of God that he is. Right? So whoever you are, whatever your style is, be yourself. Okay? Because God has made you and he loves you and who you are is good. So be yourself when you present your testimony. Okay? The important thing, though, that should be consistent is however you do it, deliver it with conviction. Okay? I'm a teacher. I can attest to the fact that if you talk to your students in a monotone voice about this is how great and awesome that God is, and he loves me so much, and he loves you too, and I hope that you'll come to church with me on Sunday, you're going to put them to sleep. They are not going to be excited to hear about your testimony. They're not going to be excited to hear about Jesus, and they're going to find the nearest excuse to leave the conversation. Okay? You cannot control how people are going to react to your testimony. You cannot make them accept your invitation. You cannot prevent them from saying that's wrong and leaving and never talking to you again. You can control that they will leave that conversation with no doubt in their mind that you believe what you are saying. Be convicted in whatever way that looks like. Make certain that you are believing what you are saying and it's coming across. Okay? Deliver with gentleness. This is actually in our quote from 1 Peter, right? At the end he says, but do it with gentleness and reverence. Okay? We are supposed to be convicting, as in we are convicting what we believe. We are not convicting anyone else. Okay? Testimonies are not supposed to be condemnation. We are sharing hope here. Sharing hope, sharing the gospel message, sharing the way that God has encountered us, the way that he has worked in our life, should be awesome and enthusiastic. It should be an open invitation. It should not in any way, shape, or form be about condemning other people for their sins, real or perceived. Okay? Do it with gentleness. Do it with gentleness for the person that you're talking to. And lastly, we talked about this already, watch the Catholic terminology. Okay? We as Catholics, we have our own kind of vernacular, our own language, and that is awesome. We have to be careful that we don't slip into that and start using a bunch of words that the person doesn't understand. If you use one, then they probably will be polite enough to ask you and say, what do you mean by that word? By the time you've used your eighth, they're just zoned out and they're not paying attention anymore. Okay? So if you're giving this testimony to somebody who is not familiar with Catholicism, make certain that you are mindful of that, right? Know your audience. Okay? I think, yeah. What do we have for questions before we break to the workshop part of, or the work part of the workshop? Questions?
What do you do when you're met with right away with kind of hostility or pushback? Like, that's all make believe, or, kind of like, oh, yeah, don't start with me.
You're going to get that. That is going to happen. If you get the hostility right off the bat, again, you can't control that. You can't make them accept the invitation. You can't make them believe. Even if you could, you shouldn't. Okay? What you can do is make it clear that you believe this. Okay? Because what I think happens in the minds of a lot of people who take that tact is, this is some long dead thing and only crazy people believe in this stuff, and no normal person actually thinks this anymore. Okay? And so for you to be able to stand up and say, hey, you might not think that, but I really do believe this. I really do believe in Jesus Christ. I really do believe that he's working in my life, and I believe that he will work in yours too. Right? Even if you're not giving your full testimony, because you're not going to sit there long enough for you to give your full testimony, but to make that statement of faith to them and just let it go. And you never know what is going to happen, right? When I was in high school, there was a girl, she was in my card playing lunch group, and we got together and played euchre most every lunch period. And she was a very staunch atheist, and I was like the new Catholic who had just had this retreat encounter with Jesus a few months before, and we were getting all these conversations, right? And she was very hostile about it, and if she, could not find a winning point, then it turned into like she'd make fun of me. Okay? That's high schoolers for you, right? I found out like 8 years later, she converted, right? And I don't know what level the things I said did or did not play to that conversion, but the Lord is good about planting seeds, right? Jesus says that there are some who reap but do not sow, and some who sow that do not reap, okay? And at the end of the day, we trust that the Holy Spirit knows what he's doing. And maybe your job is not to sit there and give them a full testimony. Maybe your job is just, you need that one statement of faith that just sticks with them. Other questions?
You mentioned that you have these ready, the short version and the longer version, when someone might say something like, why are you Catholic? Do you ever have opportunities that you think the Lord's leading you to speak if someone doesn't ask? Like, I don't know if anybody's ever asked me in my life, why am I Catholic?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so again, sometimes they will ask, and they might not ask why you're Catholic, they might ask, why are you doing this virtuous thing or whatnot? But yeah, even if there aren't asks, there are times that you can insert it, right? You're always being ready, so you're looking for the doors to open. All right, so I gave the example about the Pope Paul VI quote and teaching. I have slipped that in conversations with teachers, okay? I kind of have the easy back door of like, at some point, they ask about my life and I talk about I did mission work, and here's the cool mission work thing that happened. And my strategy is just, I'm still looking for them to give me at least a little bit of an opening, but I want people to know that I'm Catholic. Right, I'm wearing a tie today so you don't get to see it, but 98% of my wardrobe are like Catholic t-shirts. Right, I talk about Catholicism all the time. I make no secret about I'm going to Mass, or today is this Catholic feast day, so happy Pentecost to you, oh heathen. I don't say that exact stuff, right? But I talk about Catholic things, right? And I just am okay with casually bringing them up in conversation. And I'm blessed right now. I work in a Catholic school, so people get it, and I can say Happy Pentecost, and they wish me Happy Pentecost in return. But previously, when I worked in a secular job, I would do that at times, and I would, Happy Pentecost, and they just be like, what? And walk away, and fine, whatever. I still said something, and I'm fine with that. I'm cool with people thinking I'm a crazy Catholic. That's fine. But sometimes they bite on it. What's Pentecost? Cool. Well, Pentecost is when the Holy Spirit descended upon the church 2,000 years ago, and we talk a little bit. Right? So you're looking for opportunities, and if you're not seeing them, then pray that the Lord would show them to you, or that He would provide them to you. Any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
So ideally, is your elevator speech kind of like a teaser for your default testimony?
I would recommend that. Yes. Right.
What was the question?
She asked, is your teaser kind of a promo for your elevator speech? Should they be tied together? And I would recommend that, so that way it kind of flows naturally. Eventually, if you desire, I have 8 different testimonies I could give off the top of my head, because that's what happens when you do mission work. And so at some point you get more and more, and so there are times where somebody will bring something up and I will actually not give my default testimony because I have perceived something and here's a different way that I think would, a different way the Lord worked in my life that I think would better connect with what I perceive in you. But yeah, ideally your default testimony is tied to the little elevator pitch. Deacon, did you have your hand up?
My tendency in response to the first question, if their first response is to go on the attack, would be, and I'm asking, is this good or not a good strategy, would be to say, well, tell me why you say that. Help me understand what your concerns are or your objections are. Is your response was to say, well, I do, and then share the positives. Would you be concerned about my response, that it might open up, all sorts of, what word am I looking for?
Open it
Well, I don't want to know the pain actually, but take us off course, take us away from a testimony and get off into this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say that the perfectly valid way of doing it. I've done that myself at times as well. If you are willing, then by all means. That's a little bit of a different skill set, and if you've got it, or you're willing to do it, or you're willing to just have an adventure and trust the Holy Spirit's going to help you get there, then by all means. Okay, I think we're actually a little bit behind, so we're going to break to the work part of the workshop.
Can I jump in? Yes. One thing that has to be underlying all, though, is, and Bishop Boyer said this very bluntly, if you don't love somebody, shut up. So whether, you don't have to, ask the questions and spend all the time loving them, but this is not a project, I'm trying to convert you sort of thing. And and loving someone doesn't mean having a long-term relationship with them. It can be loving someone on the street and just desiring what is good for them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Good addition. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take some time to actually write some testimonies. So there's a worksheet here. Dominic's going to come in and hand it out, and this is essentially like a step-by-step walkthrough about how you could start writing a default testimony. You are not bound by the steps that I have listed on this worksheet. Feel free to use them for as much as they are helpful and ignore them for as much as they are not. But just start writing some things out, starting with brainstorming a list of ways that God has worked in your life, and then moving through, let's actually write the beginning, middle, and end of the testimony. So we are going to take, let's say 15 minutes, and we're going to come back right about 11 o'clock with at least a start of what we're looking at. So go ahead and work through that. I'll give you guys like a 2-minute warning as we're getting close to the end, and then we're time to share with a partner what our testimony is.